for coming tonight. This is a process that's been long coming, and it's an important process. The commissioners have felt all along that we wanted to talk to the community and to tell them where we've been and where we think we're headed. I want to introduce the people up front who will be talking tonight. If anybody can't hear me, raise your hand, and I'll try a little bit louder. Jack Wasbeck is the county administrator. Cheryl Trombley, director of finance for the county. Catherine Kendup, who is the nursing home administrator of Maplewood. Jennifer Harris is the executive assistant to Catherine, and she'll be taking notes on your comments and questions so that we'll be able to put that up on the website. Over here we have Jack Duggan, who is the director of Monadnock Economic Development Corporation. John Hoffman, the chairman of the Maplewood Task Force, and Jack Pratt, who is the chairman of the county commissioners, representing District 1.
And who are you?
And me, I am Stolen Rogers. I'm the county commissioner for District 3, which happens to include Jaffrey, Ringe, Dublin, Harrisville, and a bunch of other towns all the way into Alsted.
Why are you supposed to know them all, Tim? You're supposed to know them all.
I can name them. Before we get going tonight, I want to give you a brief idea of how we got here. The commissioners recognized a long time ago that Maplewood was aging and that things were going to be required. Back as late as early as 2008, a study was done on the problems and solutions for Maplewood. A little over a year ago, about 16 months ago, the commissioners decided to have a task force appointed to take questions, to go into the problem and to examine what it was, and it was composed of people from throughout the community, people in the medical field, etc. That commission met 14 times and handed in its report to the county commissioners in August, and the commissioners received it and passed it on to the chairman of the existing delegation. Next Tuesday there will be an election, and we hope that to have that delegation engaged with this. There will be some changes. We don't know who they are. Before I get started, however, I do want to recognize the current members of the representatives to the general court. I'd ask you if you could please stand up and give me your names.
Dick Ames, I'm here. Jaffrey,
Harry Young, Jaffrey.
John Hunt, Ringe.
Now, there are other candidates in the room. I ask them to stand as well.
Pat Martin from Ringe.
I'm Perry Sawyer from District 1, which is Westmoreland, Walpole, Chesterfield, and Hinsdale.
And I'm Frank Sterling, and we're running against Pat, so one of us will be there.
There's also a candidate for county commissioner in the room.
Peter Graves, I'm running for commissioner for District 1.
So with that, I'm going to turn the matter over to the county administrator, Jack Wasbeck, who will begin the story of how we are, why we are here.
We're going to have about 3 sections of this presentation tonight, and then we're going to have some comments and questions from you all that these people will answer. I'm going to start out by describing the fact that the history of the county is that we've operated a nursing home for a long, long time. We've been in the what I'll call the safety net business for about 100 years, and so as the nursing home, the current building, approached its 40th year, one of the questions that the task force was charged with was, should we even be in the nursing home business? Should we be operating a nursing home? And that was a question that I'm sure Chairman Hoffman can answer. Their conclusion was, yes, the county should remain in the nursing home business. But another question that came up was why why do we have to pay it? Why isn't this an obligation of the towns? And there is a statute out there, I guess I'll stay over here so you all can see that. There is a statute that requires the county to pay for this sort of care. So it is clear that the county has a statutory obligation to pay for long-term care. But we don't have to be a provider of long-term care. We got into the business some years ago when there were fewer providers, and it was cheaper for us to be a provider than a payer. That's not quite so much the same now. But that's a little bit of the history about what the county's obligation is for the care of people in nursing homes. The task force reached a conclusion, and we're going to have some comments from them about their recommendation to form a greenhouse campus, if you will, in Keene, which would basically move the operation out of Westmoreland. After that discussion, I'll discuss a little bit about what the options are if we are to stay in Westmoreland. And those options include certain renovations. And then finally, Commissioner Pratt will talk about the third option, which I'll show you up here now, which is to wait. There are a lot of questions on the future funding of Medicare. There's a lot of questions on the future funding of Medicaid. There's a huge demographic bubble coming. All of these slides, by the way, are in the handouts that are in the back room there, which you may have already picked up. So Commissioner Pratt will talk about why that may be a reasonable option at this time. So I think what I'll do, so that's what we're going to do. It'll be 3 basic sections, and then we'll do some comments and some questions, and we'll stay here as long as you want to answer questions and do what we can do.
Jack, just a second. I also want to recognize they have come in late, Representative Lay from the district, and to Jack's left is Chuck Weed, who is the presumptive next commissioner from the Keene, Roxbury, Marlboro area, because he was nominated in his primary and has no opposition, so we kind of assume he's going to get the job. Thank you.
Yes. There's another gentleman who came in, Bud Creekmore, he's running for the House as well from Jaffrey.
Okay, would you stand up, sir?
All right, so I think I'll turn it over to John Hoffman now to discuss a little bit about the conclusions and the observations of the greenhouse. And then Jack Dubin at the end will talk about how it might be paid for. And then we'll talk about with some staff how the operating pro formas and that sort of thing, so give you a sense of that. That'll be the first section.
The first thing I want to say about the greenhouse is that this is, when we refer to the greenhouse, we're talking about, it's the name of a national program. It's not a sort of glassed-in enclosure where you have potted plants and orchids. It's the name of a national program that is providing a rather different and modernized form of long-term care. This is something that was started about 10 years ago by a doctor who was a geriatrician named Dr. Bill Thomas. And he was working in upstate New York and visiting a patient of his in a conventional nursing home, and treated whatever it was that he was there for, physical ailments, whether it was bed sores or whatever. And when he finished, as he was leaving, I guess, and saying goodbye, he looked at his patient and said, "Well, now, how are you doing?" And she paused and looked up at him and said, "Doctor, I'm so lonely." And that was his light bulb moment, that the problem that he was there to treat her for was not the underlying problem that she was having. And he thought there was something that had to be done, and he set about trying to do something. about the sort of three plagues of living in a conventional nursing home environment: loneliness, helplessness, and boredom. Sure, they need medical treatment, and the traditional model of nursing homes all over the country has been based on sort of a hospital-like setting where people were provided usually very good care, medical care, but their psychological and spiritual basis was not being addressed in a way that made anybody want to be there. I mean, you think about it, most people, if they're given a choice, wouldn't want to spend their last days in a conventional nursing home, sharing a room with a stranger, or sharing bathrooms with other people. All of us have probably, or most of us have probably had experience that in our own families that have seen this. In my own case, my 84-year-old grandmother, who was really very independent and in good shape, but it got to the point where we had to put her in a nursing home. It was a very nice place, and she died within 30 days. She just said, "I don't want to live here," and she gave up. And when I saw what she was living in, I wouldn't have wanted to keep on living there either. So Dr. Thomas thought there had to be a better way of providing long-term care, and he created this concept that we now refer to as the greenhouse, which is a combination of a different form of care for the elderly or the people that are in the facility, and in a different environment. And the greenhouse, physically refers to a different facility than the traditional long-term care nursing home, which is, as most of you know, typically you see long, maybe a multi-story building, long corridors. It's sort of a hospital-like setting. And in contrast to that, the greenhouse is a house. And you have one or more, usually a little campus of houses, one-floor, one-story houses, that typically have 10 to 12, sometimes 12 residents. Everybody has a private room with their own private bath. They share a common living room, and it is a living room. It's like a living room. It's a fireplace, couches, and easy chairs, and that kind of thing. When you go in one of these places, it feels like a home, it looks like a home, it operates like a home. They have a common dining room where they all eat together, but they can also eat on their own schedule. There's an open kitchen that sort of faces into the dining room. They can go in there if they're able, and if they want to make a peanut butter sandwich or something in the middle of the afternoon, they don't have to wait for a bell to ring and then be ushered into a sort of large dining room where carts bring trays or that kind of thing. It feels like a home, it operates like a home, it's a place where people go to live, it's not a place where people go to die. We found this concept very appealing. And I have to say, when the task force started, I certainly didn't, and I don't think anybody on the task force had ever heard of the greenhouse. We were commissioned to try to come up with recommendations for what would make the most sense, what would be the most desirable thing for the county and the county taxpayers to carry out its function of providing long-term care, largely for those who can't afford other kinds of facilities. There are more of us that are going to be looking for that kind of help. The statistics now and the projections are now that 70% of people that are over 65 are going to need some form of long-term care for perhaps up to 3 years. Now, I'm over 65, and I think there may even be a few people here that are also over 65, and we all have to be thinking about it. Not everybody can afford $100,000 or more a year to go into a nice facility. Not everybody can actually have family or others to take care of them at home. Everybody likes to stay home, but that can't be done by everybody. So there's going to be a need for this kind of care And the question is, what's the best that we could do in our community for the folks that are going to need it? So we came across this greenhouse concept, which was new to us, heard about it, looked into it, talked to the people who run it, who have, I've met with Dr. Thomas, who was the creator of it. We went to visit several of them. There are none in New Hampshire. There's a couple of them in Massachusetts, and there's over 150 of them around the country now. They're in something, I think, over 30 other states. And people who, professionals in this area, who I've talked to, had heard about the greenhouse and had been looking for somebody to try to bring one to New Hampshire for years. And we have the opportunity to do it here. So we went to visit several of them. The task force visited several of them in Massachusetts. We talked to the people who run these, run the program nationally. We talked to people in these facilities that we visited, the staff, the residents, learned what they had to say. And all of this led us to believe that this would be a very desirable future for Maplewood if it could be done here. And there were obviously several factors that bear on that. Financial feasibility, would there be a site available, where should it be? But it seemed like this was the direction in which we should explore. So having decided that, we set about a financial feasibility study that actually took about 5 months, and it was an intense analysis of the operating cost of a greenhouse compared to the current operating cost at Maplewood. And Catherine and Cheryl worked with the greenhouse people diligently for months to try to analyze the cost, and it got extremely detailed. I mean, down to, you know, how much you're spending on you know, lunches for volunteers and that kind of thing. The end result of that was that the operating cost of the kind of greenhouse facility that we recommended would be about the same as the current operating cost at Maplewood, actually a little bit less, but directly comparable. Personally, if that hadn't come out as something that was going to work, I thought this thing wasn't going to go anywhere. So that was one piece of the financial analysis. The other was, well, what would it cost to build one of these things? And that we looked into, and Jack Dugan's going to talk about that in a minute. And we also looked at the cost, the construction cost of other greenhouses around the country that might be in comparable areas. And actually one of them you're going to see in a minute is one that was one of our models. And essentially what we came up with, and the bottom line of that analysis was that we could build a greenhouse campus consisting of 15 10-person houses where at a cost to the county and the taxpayers of the county of $18 million for a $30 million facility. That we compare to what the cost would be to do with really even just modest renovations out at Maplewood, just fixing up things that desperately need attention, you know, plumbing and electrical and that kind of thing. Wouldn't change the configuration at all. People would still be sharing a bathroom with 4 other people. And that was about $16 million, and the cost of even some further improvements, perhaps getting it down to single rooms, which would reduce the population rather, be about $22 million. So the cost of the county and the taxpayers was comparable and favorably comparable to even the most modest renovations that are necessary out at Maplewood. On that basis, we thought, okay, can we finance this? Can we get a financial plan that enables us to do this sort of magical financing where for $18 million you get a $30 million facility? And that is possible if it was located within something called the New Market Tax Credit Zone in the area around Keene. And we've identified a very suitable parcel for that. Jack can mention in a minute. that would qualify the project for new market tax credits and other grants that would enable us to construct at a construction cost of $30 million, a cost to the county and taxpayers of about $18 million. So at this point, what I'm going to do is show you a short 3-minute video of a greenhouse in operation. It's in upstate New York. It's very similar to the model that we've proposed, and the size of the building was exactly the size that we've modeled on. I think it's about 6,500 square feet or something. And this will give you a better idea than anything I can say of what it looks like and what the people are like there.
I think my life is much better.
The same staff is here mostly every day. So we get a chance to build that strong relationship.
Welcome home to the St. John's Greenhouse home. The moment you walk in, it feels like home. Comfortable chairs and a fireplace in the family room. Cooking in the kitchen. Laughs and conversation at the dining room table.
It is our family. We consider each other family. And it's the whole idea of greenhouse is to make it like home.
Everything is cooked right here in the kitchen. It's amazing.
Each St. John's Greenhouse home is home for 10 elders and are built with all the elements needed for senior living care and support. Elders have their own individual spacious rooms with carpeting, windows, and private bathrooms.
I think my bedroom is very pretty. I think it was very, very well done. I have all of the equipment I need for taking a shower or washing in any way.
The biggest thing is the pace. You're not tied to when the food truck comes, when the med cart comes. I think basically we're more in tune with the elders and their rhythm of the day.
The suburban residential setting has the look and feel of any other neighborhood home. They have a screened-in porch and a beautiful backyard. You can take a leisurely break or do some gardening.
I can get outdoors and see the grass and the trees.
We got 3 different kinds of beans, and we're gonna let them grow up the fence.
There are 10 different bird feeders, and we just love to be out there.
Each resident receives St. John's quality care from nurses and staff. And the space, privacy, and comforts make visiting loved ones even more special.
It's like they're going to their grandmother's house or grandfather's house, and they feel more comfortable.
I entertain a lot here. I have my friends come here.
It's a little bit more private, and we get to meet everybody she's living with, and it's like visiting her home.
And a thing of love.
From the staff to friends and family, and most importantly to the elders, St. John's Greenhouse home is truly a place to call home.
Living here in the greenhouse, it's basically like you're at home.
Let me mention just a couple of other things before turning to numbers and stuff like that. You may have noticed, and actually I did for the first time myself. There was a room off to the side someplace. Most of these have a den. In other words, you don't have to. It's not just the one sort of living room. There's a den where you can sort of have more privacy or meetings by yourself. And one of the advantages of the greenhouse system is its flexibility, so that some of these homes, instead of using that room as a den, you could use it as a PT room or a treatment room or something like that. And I think one of the great advantages is the flexibility in having, in our case it would be, if this were done, say 15 different homes, configured for different levels of care that's needed. One of the questions we've gotten frequently is, well, is this something that's suitable for different levels, people needing different levels of care, and people who perhaps need more care than, say, folks who might be able to be more mobile. Two of the places we visited, one of them they had, one of the facilities was all ALS victims. Everybody in that wing had advanced ALS, and our host there actually was a guy that only could move an eyebrow. It's a young fellow, I don't know how long he had ALS. He's actually a movie producer. He runs his business from his room. They've got it set up so he actually is producing movies. One of them was actually out at the, what do you call it, the Sundance Film Festival. And another illustration of that really was interesting from him, this model where the individual residents have more say in what they do or what they do for their own entertainment. They're not looking at what the bulletin board says. You have to go play bingo from 10 to 11. They decided, these folks in the ALS wing decided what they wanted to do for their entertainment was not to play bingo, that they wanted to go skydiving. So they actually arranged a trip to some skydiving facility in Massachusetts, and they all went skydiving. I mean, I have the video of this. I think it was on PBS. And when you see these people coming out of that plane, you know, these are folks that are totally paralyzed and, you know, stuck. And all of a sudden, there they are. And, you know, some guy with those helmet cams, you know, was following them down. And the expressions, you know, I get chills when I think about it. So, again, it illustrates the sort of concept that is the basic philosophy of this thing, that the individuals, the residents, have a big control of their own lives. They're not treated as patients. And there was one other thing I was going to mention before I turned to the, you know, fascinating number stuff, and I can't remember what it was. So maybe I'm ready. Well, I'm only 80 years old, and I have excuses for memory. So anyhow, I'm going to turn it over to Jack, and he's going to talk about how this financing thing, and this isn't imaginary. I mean, they've done it several times now here in the area, so it's something that actually works.
Thank you, John. Somehow he forgot what he was going to say now, but he's obviously remembered most of my presentation from the previous because he's already stolen a lot of my funding. But anyway, I know many of you in the room. Some of you are new friends. I know I've seen you at different locations at the previous three public hearings. But for those of you who don't know me, it's Jack Dugan. And I'm president of a group called Monadnock Economic Development Corporation. And our office is in Keene. But what we are is a regional economic development group. We're actually not-for-profit. We're a 501c3. Some of our more recent projects that you may be familiar with, in Keene, for example, in downtown Keene, we're the developer of the $55 million project on the east side known as the railroad land. Most recently, within the railroad land, we built and we own all the equipment and the Monadnock Food Co-op and lease it back to the not-for-profit cooperative. And another important downtown project we completed just a few months ago was the new courthouse in Keene as well. Again, it's a building that we developed, we funded, we built, and we own, and we actually leased to the state. And coincidentally, we used many of the same funding mechanisms to accomplish that project as we proposed the greenhouse project. I was not part of the task force, but when the task force moved through months and months and months of meetings, and they came to the conclusion that they were very, very interested in moving forward with the greenhouse alternative in the Cheshire County, they approached us and asked us if we had some creative ways to provide funding. As John mentioned, there was a couple of places where the humorist said, is it going to cost more to operate? No, and that was one hurdle. And then we got to the point, what's it going to cost to build? and that's where we got involved. So what we were presented with as a potential project is up on the wall right there. And basically, the total project would include the purchase of land in an eligible New Markets Tax Credit census tract, and I'll touch on that in a minute. The construction of 15 10-resident homes, just like the ones you saw in the video a couple of minutes ago, and they're about 6,710 square feet each. The construction of one administration building, again, about the same size, 6,700 square feet. If you're going to build a greenhouse, you have to outfit it with all the appropriate equipment that they need for the care that they want to provide and for the folks to enjoy living there. So that's the purchase of new furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And last but not least, again, in this project that we were charged to find funding for, was the funding of pre-opening training costs. This is a completely different model of care that I'm sure we're going to hear about a little further on this evening. So it needs some training to bring people up to speed on a greenhouse model. So with that in mind, this is a very, very simple project, sources and uses. And I guess I'll start in the uses first. Land and construction is just under $28 million. Now, what that line item includes is all soft costs related to building this thing. So consultants, architects, permits, testing, you name it, all soft costs plus hard construction costs plus the purchase of the land, so just under $28 million. FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, that's what I just mentioned. We've got to outfit these new homes in the administrative building. And again, last but not least, the training funding, just under $900,000 to training folks to work on the new greenhouse concept. So it's just, we estimate it's just under a $30 million project. The construction budget was developed in consultation with Greenhouse. I think John touched on this. We asked them what other similar type complexes cost in other parts of the country. But we weren't satisfied then. We went a step further and we talked to the region's largest construction management firm and asked them to vet the numbers. And we weren't satisfied then, so we went to a construction consultant that we use on all our projects, who thankfully is right on target on all of our projects, and he confirmed the numbers too. So we're pretty comfortable with these numbers. Now, the sources to pay for that $30 million project. A bank loan of about $18 million, and that's an important number to remember when we get to the New Markets tax credits. A number of different types of grants. This project is eligible for Community Development Block Grant, Community Development Investment Program money, and a number of other small grants that would amount to about $2 million in outright grants for the project. And then this New Markets tax credit equity of just under $10 million. So now let me talk about New Markets. New Markets tax credits is a federal government program that was established about a decade ago to encourage economic and community development in low-income census tracts. In Cheshire County, there's only 4 tracts that are eligible for New Markets tax credits. In other words, there's only 4 low-income census tracts in the entire southwestern part of the state. All of the town of Hinsdale, all of the town of Winchester, and then 2 tracts in Keene. And that's Keene. And that V shape of pretty much in the middle is Central Square, Court Street, Washington Street. The shaded orange or red or whatever color that is are the eligible census tracts in Keene. So we needed to find a tract of land within that shaded area in Keene with municipal water and sewer, out of a floodplain, not contaminated, available and large enough to accommodate not only this initial campus of 15 homes in one administrative building, but going forward, if there's ever a need for or the willingness to expand it and include different types of uses or additional homes at the site. We have identified that site. We have negotiated an option for that site. Obviously, we don't exercise the option until the county delegation weighs in and makes a decision as to what direction they want to go in. So, with New Markets tax credits, now we know where the project could go. New Markets tax credit, you strip away all the the fancy boxes and the bells and whistles is basically a program that offers a tax credit, a federal tax credit equal to 39% of an entire project in one of these eligible census tracts. We would receive the tax credits, we would sell the tax credits. The market for the tax credits now is about 85 cents on every dollar. So if you did the math on this thing here in your head, 29,950,000 times 39% times 85 cents is $9,928. That's how we come up with that equity. So we have an investor now who partners with MED State to develop this complex and invests equity of almost $10 million. So the benefits of the new markets tax credit is that while we have to own the project for at least 7 years, that's the recapture period of these new markets tax credits, for those first 7 years, the interest that the payment that we make on that $18 million loan is interest only. So right out of the chute, you're saving some money. During those 7 years, again, because it's owned by an entity that's a partnership between us and an investor who put in $10 million, Keene will be paid full property taxes. So they get a nice bump for the first 7 years of the project. But here's where it gets really great and really exciting with new markets tax credits. And that is after the 7th year, this new markets tax credit structure unwinds. Why it unwinds basically is the investor who put the $10 million in is recouped everything they wanted from this project. They've already got the return on their investment that they bought going in. So they go away. They leave the structure. But they leave the $10 million in the project. So what's left? An $18 million loan. And that's what we would propose after the 7th year to sell to the county at that point. So you get a $30 million project, a brand new greenhouse. It's going to cost slightly less to operate. It costs $30 million to develop for $18 million. And that was our conclusion, and we think it makes sense.
We also looked at the operating costs. That was the construction costs. We looked at the operating costs, and as John Hoffman mentioned, we did spend 4 or 5 months working out the feasibility study, and Cheryl and Cheryl Trombley and Catherine Kindock can talk about the work that went into the feasibility study.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Cheryl Trombley. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I do want to point out to you that this is a feasibility study that Catherine and I went through. It is a tool that the greenhouse people gave to us that allowed us to go through everything that needed to be considered in the operation of the operating under the greenhouse model. In addition, we also went to what we do to operate our nursing home to make sure that we were not forgetting something that we know would be unique to us that we would need to incorporate. So whereas when we're operating in Westmoreland and we make all our own water and sewer, we knew that we would have to consider a water sewer bill in Keene because if this structure was built, we would be doing it in Keene. But those are like the detail levels of everything that we had to consider, going line by line on everything for administration, dietary, housekeeping, laundry, or actually it's a bit different under this structure, which Catherine will explain how the staffing changes to fit this model. But this can be found on the county website. So if you went to the Cheshire County website, which at the end of this you'll see how to get there, there is a link to this particular feasibility study that you can go through to your heart's content line by line. And then if you have any questions, you can feel free to give me a call. But I will pass this along to Catherine so she can talk about the staffing net on this model.
Thank you. So again, I'm Catherine Kindock. I'm the administrator of Maplewood currently. As John has presented and Cheryl has been discussing, we did a very thorough feasibility study to look at all of the staffing needs and the changes. So just to outline the difference, you heard John talk about the medical model versus this is a social kind of a model. Currently at Maplewood, our structure is very much like a hospital type of a building with different departments that are like silos that work in a way independently of one another. So you have your therapy, laundry, housekeeping, dietary, nursing. The model as I've studied it and understand it in the greenhouse is that you have a home structure. So instead of the long corridors, you have very much a home like as you saw in the video. And the staffing pattern is different. What I've understood is instead of it being hospital-like with nurses and medication carts, you have, in this situation, a universal worker. What we would call at Maplewood an LNA is, there's a special word which is a Persian word, which the word happens to be Shahbaz, but this universal worker is trained, which is where the training costs come in. The training is for them to understand how to manage the food service part of it, how to manage the laundry part of it, how to manage the housekeeping part of it. So you actually have a higher staffing to resident ratio in the greenhouse by decreasing the silos. It is a net decrease in staffing compared to our current model in our hospital-like structure with all of the silos. There's a net decrease in staffing, which accounts for that little bit of cost savings that John had mentioned. So that was just the bit of an overview of that aspect. Some other questions that have come up to me over the course of these meetings have included, for example, the difference between, well, Maplewood is very beautifully located on a Connecticut river, all the scenery, the outdoor area. But one thing that I have to be open and honest and share with you is Maplewood is 5 stories. It's almost like a walkout basement, and then the first floor is the service area. The residents of the nursing home begin to live on the 2nd floor. There's no immediate and direct access to the outdoors. So to be honest, it's really challenging for staff to get our elders outdoors on a routine and regular basis. So as I see this model, I do see the opportunity for our elders to get outdoors a lot more. Do you change from the Connecticut River scenery? Absolutely. But do you get outdoors more? I think that is more feasible. Other questions that have been asked is, well, what about therapy? You lose the medical model here. You've got this therapy gym. That's true. But as I am a physical therapist, as therapists, we are trained in how to give care in somebody's own home. So the therapist would very much be able to transition and do the care in a home-like environment. And as John alluded to, each of these homes is designed with a special room. In many homes, they make it a den. But I proposed in our feasibility study that we would have 2 homes that would be therapy, the rehab for short-term rehabilitation homes. We would then propose to put therapy equipment in those 2 rooms and make it a gym instead of the den. Also, other questions that have come up are, you have your own room and it has a ceiling lift that goes from the bed to the toilet and shower. What about the tub bathing? The models in the homes that we visited still have one spa room with a tub in it, with an ability to get someone even fully dependent on a mechanical lift into that tub. So there are still those same amenities even in that kind of environment. So that was just a quick overview, and a bit later we'll open it up to questions and I can answer specifics. Thank you.
So that's essentially the greenhouse concept. The other concept that I'm going to talk about a little bit now is what happens if we just stay in Westmoreland and do some renovations. Go back 2 slides. No, one more. Well, what do I have? I have is number 5. Number 5 of 14? There we go. What we did was we scoped out 2 general renovation budgets, the $16 million and the $22 million. Now, you can do any level of renovation you want, from nothing to a whole bunch. But these are just two benchmarks. Let me talk a little bit about them. What the $16 million is generally focused on is doing some very significant renovations, or I'll say refurbishments, like paint and flooring and carpets and drapes. But it also includes widening some doors, because the standard now is wider. There's a lot of people coming in nursing homes that weigh a lot more, wheelchairs are bigger, so forth and so on. But also there's because of the increasing acuity or the illness or the sickness of the residents there, many more of the residents need help being getting lifted out of bed and transferred and that sort of thing. So one of the goals would be to take down the ceiling, put up a ceiling on which you can have a patient lift, which all of the greenhouses have built in. Takes them in a lift from the bed to the bathroom and that sort of thing. Right now up at Maplewood we have portable lifts. We share them. There's 4 or 5 on the floor, and the staff has to share them, and they move them from room to room and lift the patients. So part of the renovation is replace the ceiling, add some structural components so that each room can have a track so that patient lifts can be installed in there. It also renovates the plumbing and electrical. The electrical system is 40 years old. The load on the electrical system is substantially greater now than it was 40 years ago for a host of reasons, all related to equipment. We do have instances where circuit breakers are tripping. We have had instances where circuit breakers, we do thermal imaging and that sort of thing where they're getting kind of hot. So there are upgrades, legitimate, substantial upgrades to the electrical system that have to happen. There's also plumbing. We spend a substantial amount of time at the moment making repairs to plumbing. A lot of the cast iron pipes are rotting, the copper is getting clogged up and so forth and so on. So the $16 million renovation would essentially be a way to attack it in a much more serious way than the patchwork that we currently do now with an occupied building. To get there, you actually have to decrease the census, because the goal would be to take about 3 years to go through an occupied building, decrease the census so you actually have a place to work, replace central electric and plumbing, and have some empty rooms so you can make these significant renovations to the structure. Listen, the structure is not going to fall down, it's not going anywhere, but there are some things which if you built a nursing home today, you would incorporate into a building. The $22 million takes that a little step further and says, okay, we've got 4 people sharing 1 bathroom. If we sought to double the number of bathrooms so that only 2 people are sharing a bathroom, the size of the bathroom would have to be bigger today than it was 40 years ago. It has to tip over a line. You have to make it meet certain ADA standards and that sort of thing. The downside of the $22 million project is the bathrooms get so large, they move into the room, and you then run the risk, and that's a really high risk, that you won't have enough square footage left to continue to have 2 people in a room. It's a regulatory computation. You need so many square feet per person, and the bathroom, adding a bathroom at the $22 million level might force you to reduce the census in order that you can have an ADA-sized bathroom and enough square footage to meet the regulations to hold the resident. Those are all considerations. If you didn't do the $22 million one, if you didn't change the bathroom, you could change some of the bathrooms, not all of them. You could have some private rooms, I'll say single rooms. So these are just some broad benchmarks that underscore the sort of work, the type of work, the degree of work that you could get into if you wanted to modernize that building to go another 40 or 50 years. Now, you could save all this money and simply decrease the census. If rather than having 148 beds up there, you have half as many, you now have 2 people sharing 1 bathroom. Spend a little more money, you can renovate that bathroom, so those 2 people, while they still share, would have a larger bathroom. Point being that if there's a decision to stay in Westwood, there's a variety of options related to the amount of renovation, the level of census that you have, that the delegation would need to consider in order to figure out what's the best mix of renovation, census, dollars, time, and that sort of thing. Because it would take some time to decrease the census by 40%. And a project in occupied buildings would take much longer. You build a greenhouse in a year, something like this would probably take 3 years. So that's kind of the scope of what would happen. If, can you go to slide 7? So what if we leave Westmoreland? If there's a decision to leave Westmoreland and go to the greenhouse, these are the sort of decisions that the delegation will have to ask and answer. We have to figure out what to do with the old nursing home building. There's a suggestion that it's an asset, maybe it has a lot of value, you have to find a thing to do with it. It can't be a nursing home because there's a moratorium around the number of nursing home beds that you can have. So it can't be a nursing home, but maybe it could be something else. We own 3 houses out there. One of the houses is called the Blood Farm, one of them we call the herdsman's house, and one of them we call the daycare house. Those houses are currently occupied. We actually have the Blood Farm occupied by a subcontractor for Monadnock Developmental Services. And the herdsman's house and the daycare house are rented by the farmer that is leasing the former dairy farm at the county. The jail building, we know is empty. We've spent a few years trying to encourage anybody to come and reuse it, see what the options are. The financial costs of renovating that building for every purpose that at least we identified for people that came forward was exorbitant. So nothing has happened there. We do have money in the budget this year to tear that down. I think that's probably the only option. We have a operating water treatment plant out there because we, as you heard before, we make the water that the residents consume. We have a wastewater treatment plant. We treat the water and then we put it back in the Connecticut River when we're done with it. So it's not impossible to close those things down. It's not impossible to reuse them. It's not impossible to sell those services to another occupant of the county property out there. But it's a process and it would cost some money. And you'd have to go through some sort of phase down, particularly on the wastewater plant, because it still has millions of gallons of sewage in it, which ultimately you have to get rid of. We have about 650 acres of land out there. Decisions would have to be made about what to do with the land. And as usual, a long conversation that we've had is the potential or the possibility, the option of conservation easements. In the past, the county has been a steward over the property for 200 years. Many people don't think a conservation easement adds much so long as the county owns the property. But those are those considerations. So that's kind of the second aspect of this presentation, which is what does it look like if we stay in Westmoreland, and what do those things look like. The third option is the wait option. And addressing that question is Commissioner Pratt, who will speak to you now.
Thank you, Jack. Let me try to make clear that I'm not speaking as an advocate for the third option. I'm speaking to articulate it so that everybody gets a clear sense of what it is. And I'm also not here to denigrate either the first or the second option. My role is to say what, from everything that I've been able to glean, people who believe that waiting makes sense, this is why the reasons, the fact that they give for it. And I think there are 3. The first has to do with the economy. I think everybody in this room knows that the United States, beginning in late 2007 or 2008, went into what could be easily called a recession. And we haven't come out of it all the way yet. We may be doing better, but we're probably not even back to where we were. And there are still thousands of citizens of this county who live from paycheck to paycheck, or from Social Security check to Social Security check, and who have trouble paying taxes. And it is for that reason that for the last 3 years, the delegation and the commissioners working together have been able to hold the cost of county taxes even. Actually, they went down in each of the last 3 years. For the simple reason that the delegation felt We don't need to increase the burden on the taxpayer. And the first simple fact is that whether you chose the first option or the second option, the taxes to be raised in Cheshire County from the taxpayers would go up by 1.5 million a year, which is about 7% of the total taxes to be raised. And 7% is a hefty increase in taxes. And that would be prior to or in addition to any taxes that we were forced to raise just by the cost of things either being passed down from the state, as sometimes happens to the county, as my good colleagues from the delegation know, or the cost of insurance or the cost of this or that. Costs rise. We've done a hell of a good job, I think, of holding the costs down, but you can't do that forever. So you're going to have $1.5 million added on to your tax base every year for the next 20 years. The total cost to the taxpayers over that period, principal and interest, whether you choose the first option or the second option, is somewhere in excess of $25 million, 25 to 30 million. And while the commissioners and the delegation clearly have a responsibility to the 150 residents of Westmont, we also clearly have a responsibility to the thousands of taxpayers in this county. And those that say wait and see say, you know, we're already paying $33.7 million a year on debt service today, which is about 18% of the taxes to be raised. This is not a time to throw an additional 1.5 million on top of that. That's the first reason. The second, Jack kind of touched on it. Folks who believe wait and see is a good idea say the reality is Maplewood is a structurally sound building. It is not falling down. It is not going to hell in a bread basket. We, the commissioners and the delegation over the past decade, have put substantial funds into upkeep of that building. We put on a new roof. We put chillers. We put in new tile bathrooms. We put in computerized nurses stations, and we're putting in computerized medicine cards, et cetera, et cetera. So it is not as if, 10 years ago the delegation said, let the building go to hell. It did not. And the building is usable today. It does not have all the bells and whistles that anybody might want. But, it is perfectly capable of serving as the nursing home for Cheshire County for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And the reality is that in my trips to Maplewood, I have yet to hear one resident say, we want this to be out of this building. That's just not what I'm hearing them say. So the second reason is, if it ain't that broke, don't fix it. We can do, through the usual maintenance that we have been doing for the last 10 years, what needs to be done to keep the building going. Plumbing leaks, at my age, I can tell you that leaky plumbing is a reality of life. I hate to say it, but here we are. We fix it, we do the best we can. I probably shouldn't have gone there.
B29. B29.
But we will take care, we the delegation, we the commission will take care of those things that need to be taken care of. And the building will suffice more than adequately. And the care, and I have not heard a single person in the task force or anywhere in this county say that Maplewood does not provide outstanding care for its residents. And that will continue. The third argument that I've heard is the general uncertainty of where we are in this country in terms of health care. All of you who have television have seen any ads for politicians, and I don't know how you escaped them, but know that the issue of where we're going in healthcare in America is very much up for grabs. Very much up for grabs. And We all know that under the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, there was considerable Medicaid enhancement. There were promises made that that would all be funded, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe all those promises will be kept. It'll be nice. But one of the things I've learned about Washington, I can say even as a member of the President's Party, is Washington giveth and Washington taketh away. And with the gridlock that is there today and is liable to be there regardless of what happens, I think that the future of the funding for health care is going to be very uncertain. What I think is certain, and I think John alluded to it, is there is going to be a gigantic growth in the number of seniors, and the number of seniors who need care, including nursing care. And those who know history know that back in the 50s, I think under President Eisenhower, when it became obvious that there was a baby boomer generation there moving to the suburbs, to the Levittowns, etc., and the states simply could not afford to build the roads that were required to get all these people in and out of the cities and around the country. The federal government came up with a 90-10 payment plan in which they put up 90 cents on every dollar for highway cost. And that still exists today. And there's, in my opinion, and it's not a fact, but it's a high possibility, I think, that as these seniors become more vocal and vote, and they do vote, or you do vote, we do vote, right? Congress will pay attention to it, and you are very liable to get a significant new program for seniors, for nursing homes, etc., in the government. So that if it was just, for example, a 90-10 program, a $30 million rehab would cost $3 million, or a $30 million greenhouse would cost the county $3 million, or even the state. So, given the uncertainty, if you don't know exactly what the path looks like ahead, maybe it makes great wisdom. And I know wisdom is not something that many of us ascribe to politicians, but maybe it takes some wisdom to simply slow down, take your time, see which way things are how it's all going to sugar off, and then proceed. And you have a building and a great staff that can keep us doing what we've been doing so well for the last 100 years, for the next 10 years or so, until we see the lay of the land. Those, I think, are the three reasons that I've heard for the third option.
The other part of the third option is kind of the financial part. And we learned during the course of the 10-year discussion of the jail that the costs of construction rise. The cost of the construction of the jail rose from 18 million to something like 38 million during the 10 years that project took place. So the cost of waiting is not nothing. The cost of construction during any waiting period would rise, and the cost of making repairs to what's basically an aging building that's been used for 40 years without a day off, without an hour off. I mean, this is not like your house where the plumbing gets used a few times a day. The plumbing in this building and the heating system, the electrical system, everything gets used 24 hours a day. So all of that stuff is something you have to consider. The building is also not air conditioned. Now, we were really lucky this summer because the temperatures didn't get where they became a serious problem. Last summer, previous summer, however, there were many days when we reached, and I think maybe sometimes even exceeded the acceptable rate that's established by state and federal regulation for temperatures, well into the 80s or higher. So that's something that has to be dealt with. If you're going to stay in Westmoreland for any reasonably long period of time, more than a year or so, that issue has got to be addressed. on an ongoing basis, and that's several $1 million.
So
I
that,
think the cost of doing the upper 2 floors was $2 million.
it's in that range, yeah.
And so, but it would not make any sense to me to put $2 million into doing the upper 2 floors and leaving other patient floors and administrative floors and therapy floors untreated. So you can figure it's going to rise.
But without getting too far into the weeds, I do want to save enough time for questions and comments.
Yeah. I just wanted to address the issues of the cost of weight. The other cost, another potential cost of weight is the loss of the new market tax credits. As Jack indicated, new market tax credits is a federal program. It requires renewal, I think, every 2 years. Every 2 years. It's now at the end of one of those 2-year cycles. We don't know what's going to happen with it for the next coming year. There are tax credits available at this time. We don't know if they're going to be available in the future. So that may go away. And the cost of long-term care is a major problem that this country is going to be facing. We see the rise in the number of older people in the state of New Hampshire is like 14%. Cheshire County is 16.5% of our population is over 65. That number is going to rise over time. The problem with deficit in this nursing home is the fact that government is not, the state government is not paying its fair share. Back as early as late as 1995, Maplewood broke even. But basically, the state reimbursement to the counties for the care of Medicaid patients has not kept pace with the cost of providing that service. So that at this point, we're getting roughly 50 cents on the dollar. That's not going to change. But if that ratio remains or increases over the course of the next several years, the part of the crisis that may come is that private nursing homes will start shutting down. And then that becomes a real problem as to what happens with the elderly of the county. We asked during the task force presentation, we asked the head of Genesis, who came, one of the leaders of Genesis, who came to the task force. Well, what would you do? Do you have the capacity if when Maplewood were to close? And he said, well, we could find the capacity. We could send them to other parts of the state where there is a little capacity, or to other states. You're talking about sending your grandmother away here. So it's something that really has to be considered. I think the role, the safety net role of the county when it comes to the care of elderly is a crucial thing. And that's part of the cost. It's not just money, it's people.
All right. Questions, comments? Field them. No talking. Just field them.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Tim. On your chart of how much it costs the taxpayer, you've got the cost of what it would cost the taxpayer for an $18 million loan, first year payment, principal and interest. What's the lease payment for the first 7 years?
It's just about,
Lease payments?
Yeah.
Do we?
yeah, I can answer.
Yeah.
Okay, you got it.
Because we're only borrowing money for 7 years essentially, we can get about a 3% fixed rate for those 7 years. So it's interest only on the 18 million at 3% plus the property taxes. So it'd be about $1 million a year. That's comparable towards, I knew you got to,
Jack, can you?
as soon as I put it
That's
away.
all right.
Oh,
I got
sorry
it.
about that.
That's all I need.
Okay.
Okay, and the second question, if I may, Kim, is when you were telling us about the construction costs and grants or approvals that we could get, any consideration been done to build to lead specifications and to install and use renewable energy sources in that building for additional credits and grants?
It is in the budget. In fact, the Community Development Finance Authority in New Hampshire has, this would become part of borrowing actually within the 18 million. They actually have they just hired a new director. Sorry.
new director of renewable energy funding, and they actually offer 2% long-term money to install those types of energy efficiency equipment. We borrowed some of that money, for example, at the courthouse. And what it bought us was triple glazed glass, super insulation. The courthouse is heated by a wood pellet boiler. We're paying about 40% of what we would have paid if we had an oil or even a pipe propane system. So similar type economies would go into this campus.
And all 15 buildings.
And all 15 plus the administrative building. I guess, I knew I had this in my pocket somewhere. In fact, it has gum stuck on it, but that's all the
Use
story.
Cheryl's notes, hers are better.
Yeah. If, comparable, so we talked about $1 million a year during those first 7 years. If the county borrowed 22 million, and they paid it out over 15 years, now you're talking a little over $2 million a year.
That's up on the screen now.
My first question is, what is the square footage of Maplewood now?
It's about 70,000 square feet.
I have a follow-up too. The reimbursement for these universal care workers, how would that play out with Medicaid? And you know what I'm saying, like, if you have an LNA and they spend time, you know, you're able to bill at a certain rate, but maybe not for housekeepers or dining staff.
So I think what you're asking is, the way that we get our Medicaid rate setting is through what's called a case mix index. And a portion of it has to do with care that's being given to the residents. So, right, it's the LNA. So in fact, by increasing the number of LNAs, you actually would increase some of that. Is that?
That's half the question. I think Cheryl can address it
Yeah, the other
maybe
is,
a little.
if not all their hours, then not all their time would be as nursing assistants, they'd be spending some time doing
That's right.
laundry.
That's right.
How it impact the cost report is what you're saying.
Okay, exactly.
What we do is we create a cost report in which we identify all of the areas that it costs to operate the nursing home. The Medicaid cost report system allows certain expenses, disallows some others. But we put all the expenses in there, and they decide which one they like and which ones they don't like, and then that determines what they call the cost of operation. So the shift in the profile of the worker from an LNA, a housekeeper, a ward aide, an activities aide, a social worker, to these Shahbazins, it's different, but we're still going to do a cost report and report what it costs us to provide care to these people. And then they'll do some math and reach a daily rate.
Okay, thank you.
Sir?
First question is, in the construction costs of 29 million, so on and so forth, or constructing the buildings, does that include the piping to the city sewer, the piping for city water and all that? Is that included?
It does. We have about just under $2 million in site improvements, which include those connections.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Lake?
Yeah, a couple of questions. You mentioned about the new market tax credits that expire. I mean, when do we know it'll be renewed? In other words, what's our current window on this program?
I'm not sure if the question was about new markets and are they going to survive? It's been actually a very popular program. It's had tremendous bipartisan support since its inception about a decade ago. Right now, though, there is no program. It has not been reauthorized by Congress. So there were tax credits awarded, or sub-allocated is the correct expression, about 4 months ago. Those tax credits are still floating out there and waiting for a project to step up and grab them. But it hasn't been reauthorized. If it is reauthorized, and most people in the industry, so to speak, think it will ultimately be reauthorized, then we would find out next, if they say April, they usually don't allocate tax credits to July. So that would be the next round where tax credits would be available, if it's reauthorized.
Okay. And then just one other quick question. I may not actually be quick, and I'm not sure it's really for the commissioners, it's probably also the delegation, but my recollection is
have we put the blood farm on the market already? And we seem to have difficulty with disposing of any of the property over there at this point. And so what would be what is the phase down cost of all of this, and is that included in the estimates?
We are exploring the potentials for a sale of the blood farm. One of the things that is currently delaying that is when we looked at the various deeds and property documents, there were some gaps and some inconsistencies. And so we've had to actually spend some time with a surveyor making certain that the land that we're contemplating selling is actually owned by us. Sensible, seems sensible. So that work is there. The other decision that will have to be made is how much land. 20 acres, 30 acres, 5 acres, 11, 100. We have had a realtor tell us that he has interest expressed from somebody for 100 acres because they want to set up some sort of farm or horse farm or some sort of use. I can't remember what it is. And he's really just waiting for some direction on the acreage and a firm decision, which we're not in a rush to make. But you know, part of this was exploratory to see what would that look like, what's the potential, what is the market response, and so that is still kind of out there simmering. The other question was, I'll interpret it as what would it cost if we moved out of that building and it was empty and we didn't know what to do with it quite. What would it cost to keep it going? Yeah. We have projected that out at, I believe, about $399,000, and what that does is we went back through the entire Maplewood budget and staffing profile, recognizing that there are attendance and things that have to be done to the systems. We still have to heat some of the building. You still have to have people there because you can't abandon it. And you have to have that coverage really pretty much all the time. So we've actually kind of earmarked kind of 3 FTEs, 3 people to keep an eye on the place and run up and down the hill to do what needs to be done with the water and the wastewater through whatever mechanism that is, and to keep the building secure under watch and make sure the boilers are still working. And so we've chopped the electricity and the heating budget and some other operating expenses to kind of sort of reflect what it would look like. We've never operated the building at like 55 degrees, so we're just estimating what sort of reduction. My recollection, I think we just cut all the energy bills in half. But it's around there. You'd have some expenses, obviously, to carry that building and keep it serviceable. Mr. Hunt.
That begs a question, what about the assisted living?
Well, that's a good question, and it's come to every meeting that we've had so far. And there's 20 people in assisted living, as we sit here today. Over half of them are what we call HICPIC eligible. Doesn't mean anything other than they are people who are also eligible to reside in a nursing home. So one of the concepts was that depending upon how you manage the census, you could incorporate the roughly 135 people we have in the nursing home today. We have 148, we're actually licensed for 150. We don't have 150 people. You could almost absorb them into 1 or 2 of the greenhouse buildings without displacing anybody. You'd have to manage the census a little bit. And so you could actually deal with them in that way. So they could be absorbed into it with some planning.
This lady in red.
What is your current occupancy percentage-wise?
Current occupancy, what was the last time?
Percentage-wise? We were 90 to 92%.
About 90 to 92%.
And you're running a $2.6 million deficit.
Yes.
And what would you expect your occupancy to be in the new building?
Close to.
Probably.
Well, I think it'd be higher.
And why?
I think the difference is that out of the roughly 138 to 140 people that are currently living in Maplewood, about 100 to 102 or 4, it varies, are Medicaid patients. So we have a higher percentage of people on Medicaid because Maplewood Nursing Home has the capacity to handle people with greater needs or greater acuity than most of the private nursing homes.
But on top of
Private
that,
nursing homes have a capacity, have to make money, or they close. Their ability to handle certain types of patients is how they can control that. They can't go much over 70% of their population being medicated without running into financial trouble. So the way they can control that is to control the acuity of the patients that they're able to take. And Maplewood.
I want to just argue with you there. I work in the senior living industry, and I work for a company, I just retired from the company, that runs nursing homes, 54 of them to be exact, across the country. They run specifically Medicaid nursing homes. They don't run New Hampshire, but they run Medicaid, they're 90% Medicaid. And they run small margins, but they run at a 3 to 3.5 to 4% margin.
I suspect.
I'll give you a better answer. The better answer is, with a new facility, private rooms, private baths, we will likely increase
These are the same
our.
kind of rooms that you're talking
We
about, sir.
would likely.
I don't get this.
Well, let me just finish the answer and then you can count. We would likely increase our competitiveness. So a greenhouse model with a new facility would be more attractive for the skilled residents, which have a higher per diem rate, as you know. Because we're so far out of town, we don't get as many skilled residents as facilities in Keene. So if there was a greenhouse campus built in Keene, and you could go there and have a private room and a private bath, we're projecting that more people would want that setting than something else.
The cost, the reimbursement rate in New Hampshire is one of the lowest in the country. I mean, that directly affects the bottom line, yes ma'am?
I guess my biggest, and maybe you can help me, I just want to make sure I'm very clear what I'm seeing. When I see the greenhouse model and I look at this, I think of assisted living. I don't think of a nursing home. So is this actually a proposal for assisted living? They all have their individual rooms, and when I watched your video and so forth of what these pods look like, these were people that were very mobile. These were people that were not in nursing homes that I have been to in the area with my therapy dogs, the whole 9 yards. Are these the people that we want to be supporting that are in really desperate need? This isn't what I'm seeing here. So can you tell me, is what I saw, and what are the percentages, the people that are bedridden and in the facility that we have now, that could not possibly wheel themselves to the dinner table?
Let me agree with you that when I first saw the greenhouse concept, it also looks very much like what you'd expect assisted living to. And I don't mean to throw our advertisers under the bus, but folks who are in marketing, not everybody looks really pretty as they age. Not everyone ages as gracefully as others. So all of the marketing brochures that I do see about greenhouse, they do tend to highlight younger looking elders, more able-bodied looking elders. So I agree with your reflection. I too had that same concern. I visited a couple of the different greenhouse concept homes. One in Chelsea, Mass, that John was talking about, has one particular, actually it's two, so these 10-bed homes that are specifically geared for ALS, which is the Lou Gehrig's disease, which is just a horrible progressive neurological debilitating disease.
I understand, we've gone through that. I guess what I want to know is our poor elderly people that have dementia, that are in diapers, and that are in these nursing homes, they're not going to appreciate this type of thing and assisted living. They need care, they need LNNs that are going to be there, and if they're not there, they need backup, that they're coming into the room, that they're taking care of, that they're not falling out of a bed. So I guess what I'm saying is that if what you're trying to get is people that are assisted living, it seems to me that that's what this program is, that maybe this is for people that want assisted living, not that really need care. And I guess that's where I'm coming from.
When I did the staffing models and projections, there's a guideline for what the greenhouse looks at for their recommended staffing levels. It didn't meet what we provide currently at Maplewood because we have a higher acuity level resident. So I increased the staffing ratios to put more of the LNAs. And even the nurses, there's just a slight uptick in what we would have to do to staff nurses. I didn't mention nurses before. You still have nurses, you still have therapists, you still have social workers. But I still project a bit of a higher, what they call Shahbazim ratios in there because of the higher acuity residents.
I want to add just one thing. One of the greenhouse facilities we visited was all Alzheimer's. All Alzheimer's. All Alzheimer's.
Well, it depends on the advancement, I guess. I just want our,
My follow-up question is, and she touched on it, what percentage of the current population are essentially bedridden, number one, and number two, what does their care look like? Describe what it looks like for me in the greenhouse model, please.
Jack's gonna look up the percentage. We took a snapshot one day. As you can imagine, care levels, they change on a day-to-day basis. It's a moving target, but we had one snapshot. So he's gonna look up the number of bedridden residents. What a resident needs in terms of care for bed level care, it's really gonna be the same whether it's at the Maplewood Nursing Home that I know, and I've been there the 20 years. I'm fairly familiar with our residents and their care needs, as to what I can see in the greenhouse. Because, for example, you've mentioned there's ceiling tracks in all of the rooms. I've got one particular unit where the majority of the residents need mechanical lifts to get in and out of bed, so you need the 2 Shahbazim for that. So, did you want more in depth as to what bed level care?
I can read you some statistics. This is also on the website. This is a 168-page document called the Compendium. It's on page 162. You can kind of flip through it. I'll just read some of these. 94% of the residents have an altered mental status. This means that they have a diagnosis of mental retardation, a documented psychiatric disorder, dementia, or other behavioral symptom. 90% are unable to bathe themselves independently and require assistance by either 1 or 2 staff members. 85% of the residents do not have the physical or mental ability to dress themselves and require staff to dress them. 75% are unable to toilet themselves without staff assistance. 65% are unable to physically move from bed to chair and back without assistance from staff to prevent falling or injury. 60% of the residents are receiving psychoactive medications due to dementia or severe behavior issues. 33% of the residents are unable to feed themselves without assistance. 6% are expected to recover sufficiently to be discharged home in a few months after restorative rehabilitative care.
And do you know the same statistics for a greenhouse?
I do not.
I mean, that would be very helpful.
It would. We did this because we actually looked at each and every resident when the snapshot was taken on December 13th and actually went down and identified what the house looked like. So it's kind of a snapshot of our people on that particular day with those people in the nursing home. It obviously changes with each admission, and so these numbers. But in general, that's the profile.
I would ask Catherine to respond to that question as to whether or not the greenhouse model would be capable of handling the people who have the statistics that Jack mentioned.
If you know.
Well, I don't run a greenhouse. What I've done is I've visited a couple, I've studied the model, I've called actually to several different greenhouses throughout the country. I think one was in the southern states, I want to say Kentucky, I don't recall exactly, one was in Alaska, a couple in Chicago. So I have spoken to different administrators or directors of nursing that are already currently running and operating a greenhouse. One of the concerns I've had is we have a behavioral unit We have residents that are very challenging to work with because of the behaviors that they exhibit. And the greenhouse up in Seward, Alaska is a specific greenhouse. It's a 4 10-bed grouping of home that does work with elders with behavioral challenges. There were some similarities that I could find when I discussed our kind of residents with their kind of residents. And not to say that just because Seaward works, ours could work, but it's not. When you see the marketing brochures, again, they do market for a clientele that looks more able and capable. And if you have somebody who's aging in place, you're always going to have residents that are going to be completely dependent on staff for all levels of mobility, including getting to the dining room table, all activities of daily care, including maybe having help with feeding, or maybe having feeding tubes. Just as you've seen people in the home situation who might have IVs, catheters, feeding tubes. That procedure, those types of care assistance devices don't just happen in hospitals or nursing homes. They can happen in all types of settings. So I have seen them also in that greenhouse setting.
Gentleman over here.
Have you considered building constructing a mix of buildings? Well, there's a reason for the traditional nursing home. Sufficient to handle those people that require that kind of facilities to be there. And it seems to me that if you build all greenhouse buildings, you're losing that efficiency that type of nursing home facility would provide.
That is one of the options that's come up.
Follow up on his. It sounds from the statistics that you gave us and our aging population that we need both Westmoreland, as well as something else. Or if we're going to go with something else, I hope we're not going to get rid of it. We, visiting a nursing home in California this year, saw the traditional nursing home model done in pods within it, where the care of 5 people became their village. So it was a similar kind of thing.
That has been done in New Hampshire as well, in Carroll County. It has some advantages, it has some disadvantages. But that's part of the concept that we've talked about. The issue, part of the issue though, between doing what the gentleman suggested and what you're talking about is the initial cost. The original estimate that was done in 2008 foresaw the building of a new nursing home along that line, not exactly like that, but along that line in Keene. And then the renovation of the property in Westmoreland as, I think, assisted living or something like that. You've got to keep in mind that we have a limit that we can only have 150 beds. So the cost of building that hospital-like building that was more akin to like probably Merrimack County's new nursing home was $40 million, and that was in 2008. We can't build in Westmoreland using new market tax credits because Westmoreland isn't in the new market tax zone. So that becomes unavailable. So any cost of building in Westmoreland has to be done on pure bonding without those programs.
You mentioned the demographics, and I just up on the bottom line here. There are currently 10,086 county citizens aged 65 or older. By 2020, that number is expected to double. And so by that time, we really will have another conversation about what are we going to do with all the people that are older now in there and need nursing home care when there won't be enough nursing home beds. That's clear.
Were there any efficiencies that you all realized in your financial analysis with being closer to Keene and where frankly the major medical facility in the region is? Or how does that wash out in all of this?
Well, listen, some years ago, when we moved the jail, one of the reasons why we moved the jail to Keene was to arguably get it closer to services. The nursing home uses 10 times the level of services that the jail ever did. And so moving it closer to the hospital means every time you have to transport somebody, and we do a lot of transports, to doctors, to emergency rooms, to this and that and the other thing, would be more convenient. You obviously don't have a 30-mile round trip.
Presumably cheaper as well?
Well, I don't know. I can't actually speak to that. My bet is if you call an ambulance and they show up at your house, I suppose there's a mileage charge, but I actually can't speak to what the cost would be. But, you know, for example, if somebody falls down and you have to call an ambulance, you could wait 30 minutes, and it could be another 30 minutes before you get to the hospital. But so, you know, proximity has its value, but it's been working out there in that way for 100 years. 100 years we've been in Westmoreland now. 40 years in this building. It's been 100 years in Westmoreland. And for that same 100 years, the hospital's been in Keene. So, would it be more convenient? Yeah, could be. Could be. I don't know what sort of money it would save. I suppose it might save some. But
Well, I was trying to get at whether there was an efficiency, and it's not clear that that's really there or not, based on your reluctance to make it.
You've got two questions.
Just as a clarification on that, it's 6 miles from the entrance of the current county jail to the hospital, to the emergency gates off the bypass for the hospital. I don't know if you're familiar.
Okay.
And it's 12 to the current nursing home. So 60 miles an hour, it's a 6-minute difference.
Yep.
Provided. So a 12-minute round trip difference from the county jail to, which there are times that can matter. I did have a question on what's the staff of the greenhouse model going to look like? I've been to Maplewood on 20 various occasions, probably for short times, and as I've been doing a similar greenhouse style building outside of Hillsborough about the same amount of times over 5 years. Short times, but the staff in the one outside of Hillsborough seems to be a different staff every time I'm there. For the Shahbazims, I guess.
In Hillsborough?
Outside of Hillsborough.
Not familiar.
And they handle severely handicapped adults, so it's not elderly, but you know, adults that can't be on their own.
Let's capture that answer that question.
But the staff that I see outside of Hillsborough is not the staff that I see when I'm in Westmoreland. Westmoreland has a very professional nursing staff. It's usually the same or similar people. What I've seen outside of Hillsborough in the smaller residential setting is, and I'm making an assumption, it's a lesser paid, lesser trained individual that's doing the care because they're doing the cleaning, and you know. So I'm curious as to what the staff is, how they're going to be trained, and are we going to lose? You know, Westmoreland is highly regarded in the community. You know, which I didn't realize until all of this, but everybody I've talked to, Westmoreland is. You know, nobody has said anything bad about it. Nobody hesitates to send residents there, patients for rehab or long-term stay. Is that still going to be the case 10 years out when you have these lesser skilled workers doing the greenhouse model?
Well, let me speak to what you just referred to as a lesser skilled worker. In fact, currently to work with a resident, you have to have a license, so you're a licensed LNA. If you're a caregiver and you're doing any activities of daily living with a resident, you have to be a LNA. So that's your floor.
Okay.
A Shahbaz, or Shahbazim is the plural, is higher trained.
Okay.
So you actually raise your floor so that the staff that are caring for the resident have a higher degree of training. They're trained in the greenhouse model, which is a philosophy, it's a belief, instead of a medical model, it's a home-like model. Instead of, it's 7 o'clock, it's time for breakfast. You better be out of bed, you better be dressed, you better be cleaned, you better be... I mean, those are the pressures that happen in a hospital-like setting. The food cart comes at a certain time, and the medications are ordered at a certain time, and It's very regimented. God bless Ford, who trained us all on how to do an assembly line, because it is very effective and efficient. And it is made for creating widgets. And now we have widgets that create widgets. That's not healthcare. Healthcare is people caring for people. Maplewood, I'm glad that you see the same staff, but the truth of the matter is we run at least a 30% plus or minus 2% turnover on our LNAs every year. That's a still pretty high level of turnover. Industry standard is closer to 70 to 80% turnover on LNAs, so something must be going just well enough to keep that lower. I understand from Greenhouse that the Greenhouse model shows an even lesser staff turnover ratio. Because your LNAs now become higher trained, you have to pay them somewhat more, and that was also in the model. So I can't tell you what Maplewood would look like 10 years from now, whether we're in the same place in the same building, whether we're in the same place with a remodeled building, whether we're in a greenhouse in Keene. I do hope we continue to have positive feedback and we create good standards. We create an environment where our staff are empowered to create good standards. I can't answer that question, and I can't make you a promise that I can't follow through on. All I can tell you is that that is the training level of what these caregivers have to be at. And the one in Hillsborough, that's not a greenhouse, because there is no greenhouse.
You're right, it's more, it's not a hospital setting, it's more of a residential, kind of the same living area, general living area.
One of the things is, in a hospital-like setting, whether you're in a hospital or a nursing home, we still have traditional roles, meaning that our LNAs and our nurses, they tend to look like LNAs and nurses. They wear scrubs. Our dietary staff, we have them wear shirts and t-shirts that say they're dietary. One of the differences is going away from the medical model to a social model, you just become one person. You dress however your setting is. I don't know, we haven't looked at that kind of a detail, you know, whether you keep a very professional looking staff or whether you have it more family-like. Honestly, I haven't drilled down to that level of detail, but those are great questions to think about if that is the decision that's made.
I have a question here.
This is for Catherine. Catherine, are you billing for all units worked?
So am I billing for all units?
The therapist works 2 units with a patient's speech, let's say, and they have to go over to the 3rd unit. Are you billing for that 3rd unit?
Are you talking about a unit of billing, or are you talking
Billing.
about where the resident
No, billing.
lives in a unit?
Billing. For reimbursement.
If a resident is eligible under Part B for 2 speech therapy units, and then they go to a 3rd resident who's eligible for 1 speech therapy unit, then yes, as long as they're eligible and that's correct and they've followed all the Medicare rules, the speech therapist can bill for those units.
So what you're saying is that if your therapist, any one of the therapists works 2 units, they're billing for 2. If they work for 3, they're billing for 3. So they're billing for every single unit they can possibly bill for.
We're doing what we can legally bill for. We do have a lot of residents that are Medicaid, and as such, they wouldn't have a specific payment source. There are those outliers that don't have Medicare. It doesn't happen very often, but we bill for what we can bill for.
I think the question he's asked, because he asked me before about it, was that if it happened that you went into a 3rd, but there were only 2 was allocated, you authorized, you can't bill for that 3rd.
So you're talking about pre-authorization. Okay, so now if you're talking about Medicare, who maybe under the Medicare Part A program, they only authorize for, say, 7 days of therapy. And if there's an 8th day of therapy, the point is, if we've only been authorized for 7 days, that therapist needs to work with the pre-authorization, whoever that Medicare managed care plan is. They've got to get the pre-authorization for that additional level of therapy. Otherwise, we can't bill the Medicaid managed care, Medicare managed care in that situation if they didn't pre-authorize us for it.
Catherine, I understand from inside Maplewood that you are not billing work, that is endemic, that there's a lot of building going by that hasn't been processed. And it's costing the taxpayers a lot of money. And that came from somebody that works there.
You still stay rep for a couple more weeks, maybe you guys wanna get together.
Third of December, I'm done.
So, but.
And I'd be happy to speak to you separately afterwards if you can give me some more information so I can look into that.
We've already done that.
You don't remember this conversation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's move on.
I just have something to add for the evening, and it's the Federal Rehabilitation Tax Act, tax credits, which is significant form of investment incentive for municipal buildings in need of repair. And I will look further into it, which I just discovered it today, that there is tax credits available for rehabbing the existing nursing home. I will look further into it and send it to Mr. Bouchard when I find it.
Thank you. Mr. Searle.
Yeah. I've got a question, and it may be for Monadnock. On these pods, have you designed them and priced them to meet the percentages of real heavy care and that? Have you designed all these 15 pods to carry the 90% that can do this and the 80%? Because I can see that to build a pod to take care of the, 40 or 50% that are in very intensive care is going to cost a lot more than one with assisted living, and I wondered if that is in that estimate or not.
It costs a lot of money to get to that level of design, of course, and we were asked by the task force to come up with, based on talking to the folks I said I talked to earlier, an average cost per square foot and related soft costs to build the type of facility you saw in the video here. So we haven't drilled down to that level of design yet. There are a lot of standard features, including the racks, is that what they call them, the ceiling?
Tracks.
The tracks in the ceiling, and the private bathrooms and so on and so forth, that come standard. Now, what we have done is we've taken into consideration that there may be additional requirements like physical therapy rooms in certain of these greenhouse pods. And so what we've done is we've put in a 10% construction contingency on both the construction manager's side of the budget as well as the owner's side of the budget. So we have a significant amount of money, I think, to deal with.
Because they've got some facts and figures there that you could put right into that and know it ahead of time.
Yeah, and Perry, I think Catherine.
The main difference.
Catherine can speak to this, because we're very specifically, because one of the pushback areas that we had was the greenhouse people suggesting what the staffing ratios would be and therefore what the pro forma would look like. And Catherine was pushing back, saying, well, listen, I've got 85% of my people that can't dress themselves, and so her staffing levels that she was proposing to them, based on our patient population, I think was geared to, that was kind of where she was pushing back to say, I know you think this, but based on the people that we have to take care of. So
Yeah, I can understand that you've done that with the staffing. I just want to make sure that when you get into it, you're going to have to use some of the manual lifts you're using now because those pods are all filled up, and now you've got to fill 3 more pods that you hadn't been planned on. And I want to make sure that's in the final estimate.
I think the main difference between the old build, the old style between Maplewood and the greenhouse model from that perspective is that in the greenhouse model, the tracks are in the ceiling and there's a bathroom at every room. So
in
that
every pod?
when the staff moves a patient, they have to move from the bed to the bathroom or from the bed to their wheelchair or other device. As opposed to currently, you have to bring in
Yeah.
a mechanical
I
device,
understand.
lift them, and then take them down the hall to bathe them. So but the facility has all of those things that allow you to take care of them.
I'd like to make one thing clear about what the task force recommended. And the task force recommended, and the recommendation, what we're asking the delegation to decide, is to study this further. We're not, and to develop a detailed plan. I mean, a lot of the details that you're talking about now haven't been developed. What we've got is a concept that we've recommended, and are asking that if this makes sense, and if this seems like a desirable direction in which to go, authorize further study. And specifically, we ask that, that a detailed plan, we're asking for authority, or they recommend that a detailed plan be developed over the next couple of months. So a lot of this detail, and I think they're important details like you've touched on, haven't been developed yet. And obviously they need to be before any final decision is made by the delegation. I'm not asking the delegation to say, okay, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to build. We're asking the delegation to say, or we're recommending that the delegation decide, this is worth studying and let's keep going on it because it seems like a very interesting direction.
The recommendations.
Yes, sir.
Given, if I understood you correctly earlier, that the greenhouse model would become much more competitive with the nursing homes in the area. And so you'd have probably a near 100% occupancy rate. And given the fact that the nursing homes have to have a 70% level or whatever it is to break even in relation to Medicaid patients, my concern is what's going to happen to the Medicaid patients who can't get into a nursing home because they can't afford to take them, who now are able to get into Maplewood, but they're not going to be able to get into it if it's such an attractive complex.
John Hunt pointed that out during the, I'm sorry, was not supposed to use your name? There was a certain delegation member who actually thought of that as well.
And you have a word for it too, it's called crowd out.
Okay.
Crowd out, it's an insurance, health insurance.
Okay.
It's when
It's an absolutely very valid question. One of the challenges that we have with Maplewood and the distance we are from Keene is, on average, I hear on our referral calls that we lose about one potential skilled admission a week because, we hear you have a good reputation, but you're far away, so we don't choose to come out to you. And that would be both positive but negative if there's a move. You're absolutely right that I think our 92% occupancy rate that we've seen on average the last few years would probably go up in the greenhouse model. But I think one of the things that we do, we get a lot of referrals that the other homes just can't take. There's certain mixes of residents that no matter what, they look to us. And when people ask, who do you take? In our leadership, we look at who is the elder that's in trouble in our community. And this doesn't speak to the for-profit mode, because if I have a potentially payer source versus an endangered elder that we're not sure what the payer source is, we've been mission-driven, so we do not become profitable in that way. That is what my understanding of what our mission has been. That would continue to be the mission that our leadership team would want to pursue until some time as we're told to do a different mission. But
I think one other factor that should be considered is that the current design of Maplewood with 2 people per room and 4 per bathroom means that there are occasions when parts of the facility are not available for use. If you have a violent dementia patient in a room, you can't put another person in there. And if he happens to be a male and you need to put a female in, you can't put the female in the other room. So I think Catherine indicated to me that number of unavailable rooms can vary from 3 to 6 depending upon the mix of the people in the room. Yes, sir.
But back to this issue of crowd out. If we look at the numbers that were up there, that we're gonna double the elderly people over 65 by the year, in a few short years here. It's arguably conceivable that Maplewood already could be subject to crowd out because of the limited number of beds that are available in nursing homes around Cheshire County to begin with.
Well, that's certainly true. And that shortage is predicted just because of the demographics. I mean, when you have that.
Gentleman back here has.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to meet Dr. Thomas about 10 years ago when I was chairman of the State Committee on Aging. I want to compliment the committee for the quality of its process in studying this, because at that time I thought it's going to be a tough sell for New Hampshire. But it really seems like one thing that you could add to your study would be some data on the improvement in the quality of life for these people. I don't see anything that has testimony from doctors, medical personnel. That would be really good to hear, because you're saying this is going to be a modification of the medical model. So, you know, where do they stand, and what is the experience of some of the other greenhouses related to just improvement? I mean, the statistics that John read about the nature of the population right now, if you just took that out of your face, that's pretty depressing. But how about improving the quality of that life?
That actually did come up during the task force. I'll ask John Hoffman to address it.
Well, yeah, and actually there have been studies, and we'll make them available, put them up on the website, because there have been studies, and I can't remember the exact terminology. Catherine can, we were talking about this before the meeting started tonight, but there have been studies comparing the consequences of living in a greenhouse versus a conventional nursing home, and what happens dynamically with the individuals if you can compare them. Those studies have been done, and they're quite favorable, and they've been written up in the professional literature. I can't remember what the terminology is. ADLs or something like that.
Let me just make a statement. It's 5 minutes past 9, we've been here since 7. I'll take more questions, but I don't want to hold anybody if they don't want.
Okay,
Is that
so just real quick one. Are we still, the location is, are we talking the city of Keene's?
No.
No,
No. What location are we talking now, or are we not allowed to say it?
I don't think that.
I can try to address that. This came up before. We have a site. It's a lot bigger than what we need to accommodate this development. It's in the right census tract. It's on municipal water and sewer. It's not contaminated, and it's not in the floodplain. We have negotiated an option. The difficulty is identifying that particular site before the county delegation decides where they want to go, makes that purchase price a little tenuous. In other words, if you guys step out and say, we want to do this greenhouse thing, we're going to get an $18 million facility for $30 million, and it's going to go on this, and it's going to go on this site. I'm sorry, $30 million for $18 million.
Jack, my question is, make it cut.
Yeah.
Are we gonna get to know what it is before we vote on that? I mean, where's the chicken and egg here? I mean, how much am I gonna get? Okay, so I get it, you're not gonna tell me that one yet. Okay, next question I have.
That site that we just negotiated, that price is gonna quadruple, if everybody knows, this is where the shit's coming.
And I just want to be clear, this is Medic doing this. This is not a county initiative.
The second question
We're not paying
is,
for it.
and I don't remember if I ever asked, is there any county-owned greenhouses?
Yes. Yes.
I guess
Yeah, we talked to them.
In New Hampshire?
Okay.
County-owned?
County greenhouses?
Yes.
So I'd like to get a couple, if you could just send me the links to some of those.
You know, it's one we actually, sorry?
I just wanna get a link on it. I just wanna-
Yeah, there aren't a lot of them. More of these are nonprofit, but there are some, yeah, and we've actually talked with them. I think the one we spoke with was in Tennessee, but I'd
I
have
just
to
like to
check
know
back
a
on my
little
notes,
more
yeah.
about that. And I would say is, and I'll tell you, I'm a part of the delegation now, may not be on there anymore, but I have a sneaking suspicion that a fourth option is going to come up. And that is, what if we were just to sell it and get out of the business altogether?
And that was a consideration.
But I'd say that's like another potential
Sure,
option that I think
sure.
that we need to know what the consequences of
That came back to the threshold question of why are we even operating a nursing home, given how expensive it is and how difficult an economy is. And you could certainly put that up for tomorrow. And in fact, in the compendium, which is on the website, there's a whole section in there from a real estate entity that does nothing but help county governments sell their nursing homes. And so there's cost numbers in there.
Right, well, I guess the key question I have, and maybe Cheryl, you'll be able to answer this one, which is if we sell it, that the cost of what it's gonna cost us to pay for those residents, is there a cost difference as compared to the 2.6 or 2.4?
Let me try to answer that for you, and this is a little bit, well, you understand it because you were on the task force. But part of the background of the recommendation that the county continue to stay, operating the nursing home, not sell it and then have to subsidize private operators to take on the people that would be out of it,
Right.
is that you lose the county, you and the county commissioners would lose control over the cost and care that's being provided in those facilities. Now, the private operators, God bless them, are there to make a profit. I mean, if we were running it, we'd want to make a profit. They're not, if they took it over flat where we are now, they're not going to operate very long at a $2.6 million loss. I mean, you're the CEO of one of these operators, facilities that's losing $3 million a year, you lose your jobs very quickly. If they're operating a loss, they're going to close. So the county, which has to subsidize it to keep it going, has absolutely no control then over the cost. In fact, there's an incentive for those operators just to pack those costs in there. Secondly, it has no control over the quality of care. Everybody that has spoken tonight and everybody that I met from the day I took this job on has nothing but praise for Maplewood and the service that what they're providing out there and the quality of care. You get out of the business and put it off to somebody else, you lose that.
Yeah, but we're doing a different business now, okay? What you just said is, you're saying how great it is what we have now. But with the greenhouse, we don't even know how well we'll do at that. We don't know how well we'll operate. But you're just saying...
Well, I don't know about that at all. I mean, Catherine has answered that. She's told you about the staffing.
So all I can say
Are you saying that all of a sudden that the staff and what they're providing now are going to suddenly fall down on the job?
I absolutely heard in the meetings that the staff will change. That every time there was a conversion, the old staff were not comfortable under that new arrangement, and that the vast majority of them, they did have a fair turnover of employees. So I do believe that when you change a model from a hospital-like environment to this new model, some LNAs are going to think it's great, and some LNAs said this is not what I signed up for.
And you're suggesting that all of a sudden the quality of care is going to go down?
No, I'm saying that you're making the point. You're defending the nursing home as we have today.
Yeah, I am.
But you're just throwing it under the bus when you build the greenhouses. You've just thrown that
No,
model out.
what I'm suggesting is that you take what you have now that's good and make it better, John. And I think you understand.
I'd like to move on to the question of yours.
After the 7 years, if we go with the greenhouse model, could the delegation then decide they don't want to be in the nursing home business and not buy the complex that we're building?
Oh, sure, they'd have to decide by 2/3 vote to authorize a bond for $18 million.
So there's a pretty good chance that it could.
Well, I don't know what the chances are, but obviously there's they're not in for a dime and in for a dollar. I mean, they will have to make an affirmative vote by a supermajority to own this and take it on.
I guess my question is back, you said you have an option. Well, most any options I've heard of come with a selling price, and if it's made public, that price isn't gonna change, because,
The option we've negotiated is for a limited period of time. I don't know the pace at which the county delegation is gonna make a decision on this issue. So there is always the possibility that our option could expire. Then they make the decision to go ahead, and that land that we negotiated a very favorable price for is multiples more expensive.
Is that the option go past January 1st?
The option is for 6 months initially.
And the reason for moving won't be based on real estate outcome. You're gonna have to make more policy-related decisions.
Gentlemen, just for the record, I was in the meeting when John put up the question, should we stay in the nursing home business after all of the work we've done today, and after everything we've learned, the vote was yes, and it was unanimous.
For that report.
Yes, to stay in the business, to stay in the nursing home business.
For the county.
Yeah, I have just a statement to say. I noticed that we do not have the figures of what it's gonna cost us when we move the residents. It's for the Maplewood existing population, because some of them are gonna require more care than others. And that means the cost is gonna rise. And for that matter, I feel that in some ways, the figures that are put out there are premature. I think we need a total cost before a decision should be made. And I think when it comes to the representatives in this county, they should all view the tapes of the 4 meetings. I've been to all 4. And I really feel that the representatives need to hear the public on tape before they make a decision.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I've been to all 4 meetings myself, and I've heard 3 options for the assisted living. One is the assisted living will stay at Maplewood, which means that we'll have 150 openings for people who need additional care. To transitioning them tonight, they will fill in those spots of 150. So suddenly now there's less room for people who really need nursing home care because we've just taken up 20 extra slots. Somewhere, somebody's got to figure out what goes on with the independent living. So my question to you is this. We know that there is a cap on people who need nursing home care, 150. Is there a cap on people who need independent living?
It's not a cap on the number of people who need it, there's a cap on
On
the
the
number of
beds.
beds.
Beds,
There is
sorry.
not a cap on
That's a
assisted living.
countywide number.
Okay,
County's
what
number.
about for independent living?
No cap.
Okay, so is it conceivable that you could build 20 of those? Because it looks like those are independent living.
Well, they're not. They really are assisted. Nobody in there is independent. I think virtually all of them, as we sit here today, need help with being prompted or encouraged to take medication, having that medication tracked. They're very, very close to a higher level of care, which is why they're there. They have met the clinical criteria for nursing home admissions. It's just that they can do okay at a little lower level of care. There's 8 of them that are more independent. All of them need some help. It is not independent living. Independent living is what you do at home. This is
Assisted living, I'm sorry, I apologize, I
But
meant
that's fine,
assisted
that's fine,
living.
that's fine. And but so there's no limits on that. We could, again, these are the decisions that the delegation are gonna have to make. They're the discussions that they're gonna have. As we thought about it, you could absorb this in. It would get really pretty expensive to operate the entire building with 1 heating plant for 20 people. So we tried to think, all right, well, what if Maplewood moves to Keene? Well, what can we do with these people? Well, we can bring them along, put them in a building. That's an option. Or we could do
But then we've
something
taken
else.
away a certain number of beds.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you all for coming tonight, it's 9:15. I hope we've left you thinking about this.
I will.
Premature.
Yeah,